Homer? With hair? Nah, get out of here. That can't be real. He never had hair. Hi, I'm Torin, and welcome to Torin Loves the Simpsons. Today we are looking at Season 2, Episode 2, Simpson and Delilah, an episode where Homer obtains a miracle breakthrough cure for his baldness, and it leads him to get a promotion at work until Bart causes a spill that runs Homer out of his supply, leading him to lose his hair again and get demoted back to his old job. Let's dive on in. This episode doesn't waste any time in getting to the humor, opening up with a very solid joke about Hitler, North Dakota, and things stay lively and funny pretty consistently throughout the episode, at least at the points where it's called for. There's a lot of mild wackiness and exaggeration built into the plot, more so than any previous episode to air, and a few good to great jokes in there to propel things along. I rather dislike Smithers joking about Homer hanging himself, but it's followed up with a nice save and Homer thinking Carl's voice might have just been in his head, so I'm not too bothered. The episode does tend to be quicker and punchier than we're used to at this point, and I think it works really well. It also foreshadows the directions the show would go in over the following few seasons. There aren't a whole lot of setups. The notable exception here is the ivory back scratcher joke, which Burns pays off on over 10 minutes after Lenny sets it up. And I think it meshes really well with the rest of the humor in the episode because it's simple and the payoff is still a quick punch. This is also a good example of the way a lot of these early plots are built so cohesively and reward the viewer for paying attention. Probably not going to find a whole lot of humor in Burns just mentioning an ivory back scratcher, but it's a great callback to when Lenny brought it up as an example of the kind of ridiculous excess that Burns might spend the money on, that you'll only get if you were actually watching and paying attention the entire episode. And on that note, I'm happy to see an episode that reflects well on writer John Vitti, whose work on Season 1 I had to absolutely drag through the mud in my season recap. I think this episode's humor style does a really good job of showcasing a bit of what makes the early stuff great and a bit of what would go on to make the later Golden Era seasons great. It doesn't totally nail either style, but it also doesn't need to because, well, we'll get to the plot right after I let you know that this episode's humor gets an A+. So this plot is fantastic. Let's start with how the episode uses its characters. The crisis that drives the plot is Homer's baldness, which is obviously a characteristic that not every character has, and that helps the story feel more original and distinct. The show certainly began to establish Burns and Smithers as antagonistic during Season 1, so this is excellent work to build upon that and start exploring it in a plot that gives them more focus than in Homer's Odyssey. And Marge is just the best here. As she often does, she spends much of the episode in a supporting role and then turns out to be the hero in the end. Speaking of which, ending with that really beautiful Homer and Marge moment is a perfect way to close out this story. The premise is essentially about Homer's self-esteem, and one of the few things he really has going for him in life is his marriage. He values his family, and especially Marge, about as much as he's capable of valuing anything. Which is still not super great, which we'll see explored more in later episodes, but it really helps make this moment so touching. And the animation of Homer's face as Marge sings to him is very well done. It shows his emotional shift so well as Marge soothes him. And the show did an excellent job setting up with that song with the anniversary singer sent by Carl, and then reprising it for the ending. That callback to what Marge at least perceived to be a gift sent by Homer is a great callback. Just in every way, this closing is phenomenal. Carl telling Homer, "Because my mother taught me never to kiss a fool," and then kissing him, is simultaneously one of the most uplifting and also creepiest ways to inspire Homer. And despite it being creepy and crossing what is definitely a boundary for a lot of people, it feels like the perfect payoff for Carl. Just right for his final moment on the show. They lead us to expect the parking lot / umbrella scene is the end of him, so it hits as a nice surprise to see him again. And to circle back to the topic of this episode's characters, Carl absolutely deserves mention, being exclusive to this episode.
Although the writers wanted to reprise him for 3 Gays of the Condo in Season 14, and guest voice actor Harvey Fierstein declined on the basis that the episode lacked that Simpsons twist. And personally, I like the fact that they left Carl alone, because he brought so much to this episode, and I think that's enough of a legacy, and it doesn't need to risk tarnishment by a post-Golden Era episode.
Anyways, yeah, no, I love what Carl brings to this story. He's exactly what Homer needs in every way. And, to the point that it's obvious he's a character written that way from the ground up, but he's so fucking smooth about it that I don't give one tiny little fudge about it. Fierstein did an incredible job as Carl's voice, and Carl builds Homer up so incredibly well and truly gets him to believe in himself, at least for a few glorious moments. And again, this episode is ultimately about Homer's self-esteem, so Carl is really helping to drive the plot. It is worth noting that Carl sacrificing himself the way he did for Homer is great as the plot of a work of fiction, but isn't something to glorify doing in real life. Odds are pretty good that your job doesn't care about you, and neither does your boss, and you should never feel compelled to stick your neck out for them. It's entertaining as part of a TV show, but it's important to recognize a TV show as not real life. As usual, I hate the Winfields, and they can go fuck themselves. The music does a great job of supporting Homer's big moment when he discovers and celebrates his new hair. Speaking of music, this is the last episode before Alf Clausen comes on board. The last time I commented on an episode's music was Bart the General, which, along with the rest of Season 1, was directed by a Richard Gibbs. This episode was done by a Patrick Williams, with a couple other musical directors involved early on this season. As I mentioned earlier, there's a wacky and exaggerated tone to this episode. The fact that so much hinges on whether or not Homer has hair is absurd, but also a good analogy for a lot of other discrimination on basis of things like race, culture, religion, immigrant status, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc. At the same time, I do worry this plot contributes a little bit to an oversimplified understanding of discrimination that focuses on overt acts of prejudice and overlooks systems of oppression. That concern in no way ruins the episode, I just think it's worth mentioning. I also love Smithers' perspective here. To his credit, he does provide some perfectly cromulent concerns and criticisms of Homer, but Burns just writes it off as jealousy. We also see how Smithers feels threatened by Homer, and it almost makes him sympathetic. But he acts like enough of a dick to still feel like a villain. Again, this episode does an amazing job of handling its characters. And to circle back to the topic of the absolutely touching end of the episode, ending on such a strong note really helps this episode feel satisfying. That final impression is critical, because in this case it takes an episode that's already incredibly strong and really elevates it. We had a nice sense of crisis and escalation in Act 3, following some really amazing story building and character work in the first two acts, and closing that all out with such a satisfying conclusion is just phenomenal. This plot gets an S. And now for the final rating. A+ for humor, S for plot, and I feel comfortable going with S- overall. That feels right. This is a minor classic that I think is severely overlooked, and it balances its humor and plot quite well. There's really not a whole lot more I can say, just go watch the episode. And thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notifications bell. Up next, we have a major landmark in the series, the original Treehouse of Horror, so I will see you in that video.